Well, there's a new show on Netflix that is stirring a lot of discussion. It's called Adolescence.
The show is about a 13-year-old student who is accused of stabbing a fellow schoolmate to death. Stephen Graham, one of the co-creators, told the Associated Press that when incidents like this happen, people quickly jump to question the person's background or upbringing. Graham said, "But what if it's not the family? We're all maybe accountable. School, society, parents, community."
Which brings us to one of the reasons why the show is going viral. Apparently, part of the premise is that online figures in the manosphere radicalized the 13-year-old boy and essentially led to him committing his crime. Influencer Andrew Tate, who has become famous in that ecosystem, is even mentioned by name.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said he supports showing the Netflix series to secondary schools in Britain for free. Starmer told the AP that showing the series will help students understand the impact of online radicalisation and misogyny. Starmer said, quote, "There isn't one single policy lever to pull. It's actually a much bigger problem than that. And that's the devastating effect that the problem of misogyny has on our society."
Many on the right, however, criticizing the show and that line of scrutiny. Podcaster Ian Miles Chong, for example, in a now viral tweet, he wrote, "Netflix has a show called Adolescence that's about a British knife killer who stabbed a girl to death on a bus, and it's based on real-life cases such as the Southport murderer." So guess what? They race-swapped the actual killer from a black man migrant to a white boy, and the story has it so he was radicalized online by the Red Pill movement, just the absolute state of anti-white propaganda.
The co-creator, Jack Thorne, however, said that no part of the series is based on a true story and denied Chong's claims. Thorne also said that history shows that kids of all races commit these kinds of crimes.
There are also other complaints from the right. Podcaster Jason Whitlock wrote on X, "I watched Netflix Adolescence last night. In one of the episodes, they're taunting a 13-year-old boy by calling him an incel. When I was a kid, no one thought this way. If you were 13 and sexually inactive, nobody thought you were lame. We've robbed the innocence of children and forced a sexual conversation on them." So this is a very fascinating discussion taking place. I have not seen the TV show yet. I know people who've seen it and who gave it a variety of reactions. They tended to be impressed with it on a technical basis. It's shot very well and acted very well.
And it's been hugely successful
already. It's been very successful. Now, I think the Labour government, adopting it as we need to really, this is an educational tool to really get to the bottom of an epidemic of misogyny that is, fueling all this kind of violence. I think that's probably not a helpful framing because we always want to be cognizant. That's like making a problem sound worse than it is. People do knife each other for all sorts of reasons. It is not, I would say it's not accurate to say that this is a particularly large category of crime. Obviously, kids do awful, including violent things for a variety of reasons. It's not a huge category of crime. It seems a little trendy to say that Andrew Tate is aspiring, like ISIS or something, is aspiring attacks all over the world. It's not really taking place, I don't think. But there can be mistreatment or just bullying of women by men and men by women, and it can be discussed. But I think that's why the right is reacting to it. Like, oh, you're saying this is the biggest problem ever, and it's inspiring all this violence, and that's not quite the case.
Yeah, but don't you think there is a genuine problem, or at least genuine cause for concern, in the rise of this manosphere that often, to me, puts forth a very, very caricatured version of masculinity? I mean, Andrew Tate speaks of himself as a misogynist and has made an abundance of appalling comments about women being men's property and this kind of thing, in addition to the fact that, of course, he's involved in a criminal case, which would take us too long to get into the specifics of all of that. But I do honestly think there is a real issue here about the influence of the online world pushing adolescent boys in particular into attitudes that are, in my view, unnecessarily antagonistic towards girls and women, unnecessarily misogynistic in some cases, certainly kind of hyper-masculine, in a way that I just find to be a kind of recipe for loneliness and unhappiness and a lack of meaningful relationships with the opposite sex.
Well, I don't disagree on any of that. I think Andrew Tate is an appalling figure, would be a terrible role model. He is just bad on every single front. He is being pushed back on by a lot of people on the right because they recognize him as a kind of, he's a kind of trafficker of pornography, and I'm libertarian. I'm for porn being legal and sex work being legal, but it just is a gratuitous ownership of and violence towards women, and actually also on top of everything else, he's sympathetic to a terrorist figure. He was very sympathetic to Yahya Sinwar. So a terrible role model, certainly. I just don't see evidence that he's inspiring a lot of actual violence, and this is where the conservative people are saying, well, what if there was a show about, you know, a kid who was a illegal immigrant or refugee from the Middle East knifing white people in Britain, would liberals be offended by that, or would anybody be saying, oh, this is an important educational tool, even though probably based on crime statistics, there are more examples of that than the other thing. The demographics of crime are mostly due to economic status, with overlaps with people of color and immigration status and illegal immigration status. I think poverty being the main motivator, not race, actually. It just correlates with that because there are more people in perilous economic circumstances who happen to look that way. But that would be if you're going by actual trends, you would do that.
The danger, I think, in all of that is getting into realms of racial stereotyping. And I think it is worth noting that the co-creator, or reiterating that the co-creator, says that this series, Adolescence, is not based on any one case. To explore the idea of online misogyny or online attitudes that could be harmful, that I think is an entirely valid exploration to have. And to the point about Keir Starmer and showing it in British schools, I mean, a long time since I was at school, but I remember being shown videos about all sorts of political or social topics that were intended to engender discussion. And it seems plainly worthy of engendering discussion about this topic when we do see, I think, increasingly young men and young women being in very separate online spaces, and partly because of the effects of the algorithm and social media and all of that, where you have content being recommended to the two genders that is very, very distinct from each other, and therefore hollows out some kind of common ground.
The funny thing about that is that in some ways, and this is even Jonathan Haidt's view, who is the leading scholar on how bad social media and smartphones are for kids.
You're not a big fan of Mr. Haidt.
No, I'm a fan of him personally and his work. I disagree with him on this subject, and we've had a number of debates about it. He is one of the most enjoyable people to have conversations with. Even he will say that a lot of the ways that this is a young girl's problem, actually, social media and online behavior and smartphones, and that the way boys interact with each other, for instance, is mainly video games, as long as you're counting that in this category, is actually pro-social and pro-team building. I mean, people think of, the kind of hysterical parent view, oh my God, my kids are playing all these first-person shooters and they're learning to become so violent. Actually, this is also a Steven Pinker theory. The evidence that makes you more aggressive or more violent is zero, and actually, if there's any evidence, it shows the reverse, that a small number of young people who are inclined toward actual violence can use video games as a healthy outlet to not practice real violence.
An escape valve, so
yes,
to speak.
and for everyone else, it promotes, it is a bonding social thing, like watching sport, but it's actually more interactive than just like watching sports with the guys, because you're actually doing a game. You're playing a storyline. There's video games have gotten really sophisticated. I'm a fan of video games, as our viewers know, and that it's actually teen girls whose online behavior is all like based on comparing personal appearance, where you do get the depressive effects. That said, pornography is another category, and I think even I, as libertarian as I am, conclude that there are, I think, some negative, they're hard to address, impacts of how available pornography is to kids, young boys, at so easy and immediately, and so much a young age. You know, you used to have to look for your dad's Playboy,
Yeah,
something hidden in the attic,
Right.
and now it's just like with a touch of a button,
Sure.
and some of it is violent, some of it is giving experts say a warped perspective on what sex is like that might not be helpful to kids.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that to your point about the video games and all of that, yes, I understand that in every generation there's always scares about, there's
Right, and that's a major
1950s, rock and roll was going to like destroy the fabric of society.
And that's
right?
a major motivator of my philosophy on this topic, is remembering that all of those panics came to naught.
Right. Now, that being said, why there should, I do think that the fact that there are these Andrew Tates of the world out there, not only saying appalling things, but profiting from essentially selling that version of masculinity to young boys, I think that is deeply, deeply unhealthy. Now, would I ban him from doing it? Not unless he's convicted of other unrelated criminal offences. But I think that it is certainly a thing that is worthy of concern and discussion.
I think kids need, a lot of boys need healthy masculine role models. I think the solution for a lot of them, everybody's different, right? They're feminine kids, that's fine too. But it's not to say that there's something wrong with masculinity or you should be less, that kind of thing, but just healthy masculine role models. It is good. Like over time it's become, we downplay or forget how regular the experience of like routine violence was for young men up until very recently. Like it used to be common to get really, really beaten up at school was like an experience a lot of young people had, or even to get in like bar fights if you're older. Our tolerance for that level of violence just in general has gone way, way down to the extent we all reacted with shock and horror when Will Smith just slapped Chris Rock on stage. That level of violence used to be extremely common. Now it's just it's confined to lower and lower parts of our society, and that's a good thing.
It is a good thing, and here I must confess my own age, because when Will Smith did that, firstly, I did think it was humiliating to Chris Rock, even though Will Smith got a lot of bad publicity for it, and secondly, I did think that Chris Rock should have hit him back, which was not I don't
showing
think
your age,
so there we go.
Amazing. All right, that was a fun discussion. Tell us what you think about this film and whether it should be taught in schools and all that sort of thing. Coming up, this is going to be fun. We're going to talk to a professor who is leaving the U.S. to go to Canada because of the rise of authoritarianism here. You won't want to miss that discussion.